I want to welcome you all to our Future of Mobility event. And today we're going to talk about innovation in the autonomous driving or autonomous vehicle sector, and especially about what we can do to drive innovation in the transportation space. My name is Peter Kurzwelly and I represent AI Sweden. I am right now based in Gothenburg, but normally or since before Christmas and in a couple of more weeks, I am joining you guys from Canada, and I will be based in Montreal at Mila. So today's agenda and why we have these events, it's really about connecting the startups and scale-up scene in Canada with corporates in Sweden, because that is one of the reasons why we are there. So the agenda for today is that I will do a short introduction talking about just presenting AI Sweden and why we are in Canada. Then Katarina, directly from the studio here in Gothenburg at MobilityXlab, will talk about MobilityXlab and present what they are doing to help corporates innovate with the help of startups. And then Benny Nilsson here from Zenseact will join us and talk about Zenseact and their challenges, but also what they're doing to really drive advancements in the autonomous driving sector. And then Michael, also from the studio at MobilityXlab, will talk about Volvo Cars and how they drive research and development and innovation. And then Caleb from Business Sweden in Toronto will talk about how Business Sweden in Canada can help Canadian startups and scale-ups target Sweden as a potential market. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&As, because this event is really for you guys that we want to open up the doors and build a stronger bridge to the Swedish sector.
But I didn't have my camera. Oh, I didn't know. I thought you were off.
So before I'm muting there, so just to give you a brief overview of AI Sweden and the organization I represent. So AI Sweden, it's a national initiative to accelerate the use of AI in Sweden, both in public sector and in the private sector. And the private sector is why we are here today. So we have the mission to accelerate the use of AI to strengthen our industry and our society, because we really believe that AI can be a transformative technology for the better if we steer towards that and we help the sector really innovate and do things differently. We are a neutral nonprofit, broadly funded both by the government and the private sector. What we work with is definitely applied AI. So we try to do everything on an applied level. And when we look at research, we're trying to translate that research into how it can help both our corporate sector, but also our public sector. And since a couple of months back, we did our first international node establishment outside of Sweden, and that is in Canada. So that is why we're here today. Otherwise, our organization covers all of Sweden, from the north, from Luleå up in the north to Malmö and Lund down in the south. And we are really trying to be a platform for different types of partners, different types of organizations to work together while developing applied AI solutions. So we are here for the public sector, we're here for academia, we're here for the private sector in terms of the smaller private sector for small and medium-sized enterprises, and also for startups and scale-ups. And then we have the companies you will meet today more on the corporate side, talking about how we can help them innovate both through research, but also through startup and scale-up collaboration. We represent about 130 partners, and here on the bottom right you can see some of our biggest corporates in Sweden. And while being in Canada, these corporates and also the private sector up to your left is really the ones we want to help in looking for, scouting for scale-up, scouting for innovation, but we do so through our partners. So while being runners in other types of ecosystems, like collaborating with the organization you will meet here today, and Katarina will present MobilityXlab. Because since a few months back, we have established in Montreal. For those of you who know about the Canadian AI ecosystem, you will recognize Mila as a very strong academic institution. And since October, I am there as a runner, but I also work in Toronto, in Ottawa. I will go over to Edmonton and Vancouver, really to look for interesting solutions, really look for how AI is applied in the Canadian ecosystem and translate that into what could create value for us in the Swedish ecosystem. And why the reason we are there is that the Canadian AI ecosystem is fantastic. It's especially on research, but we also know it's a bubbling and a very interesting startup ecosystem. So there's a difference now in terms of how much we invest in innovation, how much we invest as a nation in research, and that is what we want to leverage and want to access by being on site. So that is why we do startup scouting. We do it together with some Canadian partners, and of course we do it together with our Swedish partner, both Zenseact and Volvo Cars, together with MobilityXlab. And this is something I will get back to you into later, because this is the first event of a series of events together with MobilityXlab, focusing on the mobility industry. So next event is in a month. But before that, we want to go through today's program. So I'm going to hand over to you, Katarina.
Thank you so much, Peter. And now I'll share my screen and then speak, because I can't do two things at the same time. But good morning to everyone in Canada, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining from Sweden, where we're situated in Gothenburg, Lindholmen, an amazing automotive cluster here in west of Sweden. And MobilityXlab is a collaboration hub to find new innovations and solutions for future mobility. And here on the screen, you see our vision, which is to accelerate global innovation based on Swedish collaboration culture. And we are founded by 6 corporate companies. You see their logos here as well. And we were founded 4 years ago, as we saw that we need to strengthen our competition within the mobility and transportation space. And how do we do that? And the industry saw a need of that we need to work closer together with each other as corporates, but also how can we work closer together with startups and scale-ups and co-create the future of mobility together. And that's the kind of start of MobilityXlab 4 years ago. And what we do then is we want to partner up with startups and emerging companies who have new technology that want to co-create that together with our founders. So we have on one side the industry partners, and then we have the emerging companies on the other side. So it's about facilitating those collaborations and accelerating innovation together. So the role of MobilityXlab is really to facilitate the industry partners we have in emerging companies. And if you look here, what we offer is the possibility to accelerate by strategic partnerships with our founding partners. You see here, six corporate partners. They're all situated here in Lindholmen, a very dense cluster of mobility companies. I'll show you another slide of that soon. So we want to work with startups here, and we have a process which I'll also talk about. We don't take any equity. We're here to accelerate and collaboration and innovation together with emerging companies. It's a new way of working. It's a faster way of working in a way where corporates can work in closer collaboration, both with each other and emerging companies. And the unique thing with MobilityXlab is also that when we invite startups, scale-ups to collaborate with our partners, we have a criteria. It needs to be a registered company, but also that it needs to have an interest of at least 2 of our corporate founders, because we want to foster collaboration really here, and we want to create a new culture where we work closer together with each other. Here you see Gothenburg Lindholmen, and hopefully now post-COVID soon you will be able to travel again, and I would strongly recommend you to visit Lindholmen and Gothenburg. You have AI Sweden here with offices as well. We have all of our corporate partners just around the corner, and it's really, a cluster of future mobility and lots of amazing activities happening at this space here in Sweden. And this is just a picture. There's lots of people here, but I just want to kind of talk a little bit about the setup of MobilityXlab. It's founded by the industry 4 years ago. We do have a small team at MobilityXlab. You see us in the center. So we're also acting as a neutral facilitator, being the interface between our startups and our corporate founders. But what's also unique with MobilityXlab is that the founding partners are very engaged, and we're deeply integrated with them, and they're working with us very closely in the processes of evaluating startups, in the collaborations, and so on. And you'll soon hear from two of our members, Benny from Zenseact and also Mikael from Volvo Cars, to talk a little bit about what they do. So this is just a picture. There's a lot of people involved here, and I think what's unique here is that the industry are deeply interacted to MobilityXlab. Shortly about kind of the setup of our program. So we want to accelerate collaborations. So we do have an application period, which is open now, where we're looking for new emerging companies and startups. And we will evaluate those. And as I mentioned, a few will join us, and the basis of that is that at least 2 of our founders are interested in collaborating. And what those startups get then when they're invited to MobilityXlab is, of course, the support of the MobilityXlab team, but they also get dedicated contact persons from the industry to work further with their collaborations. And then we have a process where we kind of facilitate and make sure that things run. We have discovery. It's about starting the conversation. Can we do something? Should we do something? Is it a good fit or not? And then you can move into validation, which is proof of concept. But what we really want to aim for is the acceleration, and that's commercial contracts or long-term partnerships together. So we run that framework. And here's a lot of numbers. We've been around for 4 years. When we started, it was from scratch. We know what we wanted to do, but we've shaped and for MobilityXlab since then. And it's been great international attention. We have a lot of startups who has applied from over 50 countries around the world, and we do have some Canadian ones on board as well. We've listened into quite a lot of startups pitching. So far, we had 8 batches, and 69 startups has joined us so far. Where 37 startups has gone in through kind of validation projects, and that number of validation projects, proof of concept, has been 72 together with startups and our corporate founders. But what we're aiming for, as I mentioned, we want to accelerate collaborations. So far we have 12 accelerations between startups and our corporate founders. And this number, it's not that large, but 4 years ago, some of our founders were not working with startups at all. And actually now, 4 years along the road to have commercial contracts and partnership with startups, it's a huge shift that has happened. And I looked at those numbers from summer 2020, then we had 1 acceleration. So now as time passes, things are moving quicker. So pretty amazed about that. Also, as I mentioned, 100 partner leads. We have a lot of people from our founders engaged in the startup collaborations at MobilityXlab. I'm pretty amazed by that as well. Here you have a snapshot of our 69 startups joining MobilityXlab. Deep Light is from Canada, and we do have quite some others there as well. It's everything from self-healing software, radars to imaging to a lot of, it's different. So I mean, the basis we select startups is that we have different focus areas, which we kind of go out and say we're looking for startups within this area, but also, is it relevant for our founders, and do they have resources to kind of look into this area and collaborate on? So that's the basis. But you can say it's solutions, innovations that apply to future of mobility. And right now, we have an open application at MobilityXlab, and we're looking for startups who wants to collaborate with our corporate founders. We have 5 different focus areas, which you can see here: autonomous enablers, smart transport systems, in-cabin tech, electromobility, and connectivity. We have general descriptions on our website. You can read more about kind of how we describe those areas. But also, if you're very interested in a few of those, we will next week host what we call reversed pitch. So this is where our the industry experts come and they get a slot where they pitch to you as a startup to say what they more specifically are looking for. So I would highly recommend you kind of check that out if you're interested in these areas, because then you get, you know, the good bits of what our corporate founders are looking for. If the timings are a bit wrong and you can't attend, you can email us at MobilityXlab and we will record the pitches so we can share that in retrospect as well. But we want to say that these sessions, the reverse pitch sessions, are dedicated for startups. So please join us then. Timeline, just quick as well. Open application. The application closes by the end of March. So if you're interested and kind of want to learn more, the reverse pitch is an excellent opportunity to listen in to our partners, what they're looking for. We will also host information sessions in March 7th and 10th about MobilityXlab. How does it work? And an opportunity to ask questions about what we do here. Then we have a pitch week where we kind of select startups interested that will pitch for experts from our industry partners. And then we have a selection and a kickoff in August after summer. That kind of the quick timeline for what we do. So short introduction, and I mean, you'll also listen in to Benny and Mikael here, two of our corporate founders who are highly engaged in what we do as well. So please, any questions along the way, you're welcome to reach out to us. Thank you.
Great, Katarina. Thank you so much. Before we go to Benny, do we have any questions from the room for Katarina? You can just raise your hand or unmute yourself to ask questions. Otherwise, we will do a Q&A session in the end of the seminar. I don't see any hands, so we'll get back to the questions later on. So next up, Benny Nilsson from Zenseact.
Yes, and you can hear me?
Yes.
Good. So my name is Benny Nilsson, as you heard, and I am the head of emerging technologies at Zenseact. So a short introduction about Zenseact, what we are and what we're doing. We're an automotive software company with a very focused area towards road user safety specifically. And I want to highlight what we mean with that. So it's all the users on the road, not only the occupants of the car. And it's an important heritage that we've gotten from Volvo Cars, our owners. And we have 3 different products that we are currently developing. The main one that is called OnePilot. It's supervised and unsupervised driving software sold as a service. And that's important. I will get back to that later. We also have something called the Developer Suite, which is a set of APIs and SDKs that enable third-party companies to do development and contribute to our ecosystem. And finally, we have the Integration Suite, which is our tools to adapt, integrate, and tune software for new vehicle architectures. And I also want to talk a little bit about how automotive software development is changing right now and what challenges comes with that. So traditional development within the automotive industry has been very static. So you do, for example, if you do a vision system, you do a dedicated data collection with development vehicles that are owned by the development company. And you have that data, you do your development, and after a while, you do a feature freeze and you do a long validation before you release the software with a new vehicle. And then you hope that you never have to update it, because if you do, the owners of the vehicles has to bring them to a service station to reflash the firmware. But we're moving into much more dynamic environment now when it comes to doing this development, where we see that moving into much more continuous data collection and also continuous development. And we will not only have one release of the software with the release of the vehicle, it will be regular over-the-air updates, which will increase the performance of the systems. It will add new features. But for example, autonomous driving, we will also expand the operational design domain, the conditions where it can be active over time. And to do this, we need to implement a continuous integration, continuous development pipeline and have all those tools in place to enable that. We must also be able to, in around 1 to 2 months, being able to revalidate all the software to ensure that it's safe to run on the road instead of perhaps a year that we had before. And to get all of this in place, automation is key, and efficiency. Another area that is changing is when it comes to the infrastructure you need and use to develop. So traditionally, the development company has their own development fleet. We still do, but it has been 100% more or less reliable on that to collect the data and test everything needed. And all of the data are located on centralized servers that the development companies are using. We're also now moving into a much more decentralized way of doing what I just described. And it's important because what we call the customer fleet of vehicles, the private people that have bought our systems, that vehicle fleet is several orders of magnitude larger than the development fleet that we're using. So that gives us much larger availability of really rare data that is very difficult to find with a small vehicle fleet. And so we want to be able to utilize that in our development. But that gives us new challenges with, for example, privacy legislation. So we cannot simply move all of that data away from the customer's vehicle. And so there are a few different technologies here that are very interesting to us. For example, Fleet Insight. We want to use that to better understand the world. One example is that running an AD software, it's important that we understand the culture where the vehicle is driving itself. And we hope we will be able to use the customer vehicle fleet to learn that over time. Another important area when it comes to decentralized or distributed learning is also something called federated learning, which are tools to be able to do updates and improvements to our, for example, vision algorithms at the edge. And that is very important because if we succeed with that, we will comply with privacy laws because the data will not be moved away from the vehicles. So a lot of the tools and processes that is needed for what I have just described are still very early in development. So here we are extremely interested from different startups and other companies to hear what they have that can help us with these challenges. There are also other open questions. For example, when it comes to federated learning, how do we update a convolutional neural network within a vehicle not having access to manually annotated data, which is key to enable federated learning. We also have what I mentioned before, the development suite, which is the tools for our third-party ecosystem. So we foresee that the vehicles of tomorrow will be open platforms very similar to smartphones today, where third parties can create their own, if we would say, apps that can run on these platforms. And if we look historically, it's very important for us to be open to what innovative companies can figure out what it can do within this platform. So we're very interested here to hear ideas and perhaps run 1 or 2 pilot projects in that area. I think that was all I had.
Great, Benny. Thank you. The same thing goes here. Do we have any questions for Benny in the room? Unmute yourself or just raise a hand. Otherwise, Benny, I have a question. You working with new technologies at Zenseact. What have you learned working together with MobilityXlab, for example, in how to work with startups? What is key for a successful startup, corporate or startup, bigger organization collaboration?
Yeah, so there are a few very important lessons that we've learned over time. One is that we cannot interact with a startup like we do with a normal partner. When it's all the way from making sure that we correctly fund project, we do not push too hard, because we understand that many startups are in a very tight situation. We've also learned to more early on give feedback what information is important from the startups to actually provide to corporate. So one good example I can throw out right now is to kind of have your business plan figure out before you start your discussions, because those discussions will many times come up early on. We want to understand what we're getting into before we put too much work into evaluating your technology. So quite a few different things that we've understood over time is important.
Yeah, great. And I think we're going to come back to that discussion after in the Q&A session after Michael and Caleb here as well. But I want to hand over, keeping up the tempo here, hand over to the studio on Lindholm and MobilityXlab, Katarina and Michael. Michael, let's go.
Okay, I will share my screen. Can you see my screen? Good.
Yes, we.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Michael Schön. I work at the Volvo Cars Research and Development Innovation Department. So I will talk about 2 topics today, electromobility and in-cabin tech, with a special focus on AI. Next week, I will also talk about autonomous drive for the reverse pitch as well, just as a heads up. My background is as an aerospace engineer for 20 years, actually, within the space industry. I used to work for European Space Agency, developing satellites, Mars rover, etc., together with NASA. Started at Volvo Cars 5 years ago as responsible or product manager for development of the autonomous drive computer. When that prototype was done, I moved over to the strategy and innovation department to see how we can maximize the potential to use this new advanced supercompute capability and AI capability that we will have for the next generation car. So I will give you a teaser what is possible now. So I will start with in-cabin tech. Let's see. Well, first, I of course would like to talk about innovation a bit. Volvo Cars has recently been nominated #1 at innovation, and this is just to emphasize our engagement with the startup community. And this is made by a global market survey, actually, so an independent survey. Moving on, Volvo Cars' vision is freedom to move in a personal, sustainable, and safe way. Autonomous drive, that's of course connected to safe, sustainable, that is connected to electromobility, and personal, that is connected to in-cabin tech in this context. So what we see now is a big shift in the automotive industry. We have what we call these ACES megatrends. So we have electrification, which is an extension of the sustainability movement to meet the climate goals. We have connectivity and digitalization. So that is connected to vehicles that are connected to the cloud, edge computing, 4G, 5G, etc. We also have autonomous drive that Bennett talked about before, and this I will also talk about more next week. And we also have the shared mobility. And for these 4 megatrends, we need much more compute in the vehicle. So we have initiated collaboration with NVIDIA, so this is public news, and we started the development a few years ago, and already in 2019 we demonstrated the first prototype at the CES conference in Las Vegas. So if we now look in cabin tech now, so now I kind of put the narrative here from a kind of a top-down approach. What we can do is to monitor the driving behavior, infotainment usage. We will have new kinds of advanced navigation systems with the Google Maps, Google Assistants. And we have also announced that for the next generation vehicles, we're going to introduce what we call the driver monitoring system cameras. And the purpose is to monitor the emotional and cognitive attributes of the driver for safety-related functions. The driver is responsible for 95% of all the accidents. And the 3 major reasons are intoxication, drowsiness, and distraction. And Volvo Cars' ambition is, of course, safety. So we would also like to address these topics. Then we also have the digital companion, the smartphone, which is kind of an integral part of the in-cabin digital ecosystem. So we have a lot of sensors, both for interior monitoring, but also for exterior monitoring in all kinds of domains. We see new legislation coming for Euro NCAP and also the United States, the Hot Care Act. So in US every year there are, I think, 60 to 17 children dying of overheating because they're left in the car. So there is coming new legislations to put in new kinds of sensors to track babies and animals. Moving on here. So I talked about this kind of in-cabin cameras. So this will be kind of infrared cameras that will be able to monitor your eyes, gaze direction, to measure intoxication, drowsiness, and distraction. And this is driven by safety regulations, actually. If you want these additional Euro NCAP points, you need to implement additional sensors to detect that. With sensors, you need good compute. And one thing what we're doing now is with the vast in-cabin sensor, we have over 100 electrical control units in a typical vehicle. So they generate a lot of data. And with this much more advanced computer, we can do something we could not do in the past. We can do advanced sensor fusion and apply AI to that. So we can get much more information that we can put application logic on to create more customer value. I will not go into the details of deep learning network here in the interest of time. But what we can do is we can extract a lot of information because we can categorize and identify what's happening inside a scene. So we can get this kind of causality. We understand what's happening inside the cabin. We understand what's happening outside the cabin. And that means that we can kind of get a timeline and then connect various safety or in-cabin tech / personalization functions to this. So we do it with detection, identification, classification, and context. And this is a game changer, actually. Yeah, this is a reference to the press release that we also made with Google navigation systems with the Google Assistant. So what we see is a clear trend in the automotive industry, not only Volvo Cars, but everywhere, that there is much more compute in the vehicles. There's much more sensors, more of them. They also have higher spatial and temporal resolution. So this is driving the compute needs at the edge, actually. Another recent collaboration, also through MobilityXlab here, is our collaboration with an Israeli startup company called Spectronics to develop the next generation advanced head-up displays. So this is to create a kind of holographic display on the windshield to project safety-related functions or information and also kind of personalization information, because the car will be able to monitor everything around you, and then it can notify the driver or alert the driver if it detects something that the driver has not recognized. And this is only possible with this new compute, this new kind of sensor capability, and also then we're connecting this kind of a feedback loop. So we have three components here. We have new sensors giving us data act upon. We have much more compute, and then we have a kind of an actuator, you can say. So we can project information which the driver can also act upon. So we are kind of closing the feedback loop there. Of course, we already have head-up displays today, but this will take it to the next level. And it's also an example of the MobilityXlab collaboration. I only have one slide, actually, for electromobility. And I show you this picture. So this is Volvo Cars C40 model. It's pure electric. We also have the XC40 pure electric vehicle that will follow many more vehicles. So Volvo Car has committed to be fully electrical by 2030. We will see some hybrid vehicles before that, of course, to cover market areas where the infrastructure is not yet developed. The two biggest complaints a customer have today when it comes to electrical vehicles are two. It's range anxiety and also the charging experience. If you look on the first one, range anxiety, that is essentially a function of three parameters. It is a function of, it's pure physics. It's the weight of the vehicle. It is the drag resistance, the CDA value. So the drag resistance multiplied by the surface area of the vehicle, and also the energy density of the vehicles. So if you optimize these three, you will get a much better range of the vehicle. So high energy density is of course needed for the high voltage battery. Also higher capacity to charge with extreme fast charging. There are also some other physical ways to improve the energy density as well, and that is to increase the voltage level. So there are multiple ways to reduce range anxiety. The second one, charging experience. Today you need a lot of apps. Local markets, they have their own kind of charging digital ecosystem. And this can be a bit of a hassle for at least the first new EV customer, how to navigate in this digital ecosystem with 10 different apps to charge your vehicle. So this is something that the industry is also working on to simplify their charging experience. And I think I leave the floor up for questions. That was my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Before I have questions, I just want to ask the room, do we have any questions for Michael as a response to the presentation? Please either use the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. Otherwise, before going over to Caleb, Michael, I would like to hear how you are looking at data sharing, because you talk a lot about the sensors you have the compute, and then looking at the activator. What have you learned in terms of sharing data with startups?
first point, Volvo Cars always respect the customer's GDPR. So we are fully GDPR compliant. I think that's an important statement. What we do in our initial collaboration with startups is the one we would like to collaborate, we sign a non-disclosure agreement. And we also have various APIs. And that means that if it's, of course, sensitive data, we don't share that. All data is anonymized. But we have also launched a developer portal. You can access it right now. It's developer.volvocars.com. And there we have provided some of the vehicle functions. You can also access some of the LiDAR data sets. You can access a full 3D model in Unity of the XC40 pure electric vehicle. And you can also write your infotainment app on the Volvo Cars infotainment system. And we have done this to accelerate the interaction with the startups. So we provide the APIs, not the actual data, but the API, which is what you really need. I mean, this is similar to when you write an app on a smartphone. You provide access and documentation, and then you can innovate on that. And we launched this portal in end of January last year. In the first 4 days, we got 120 companies developing apps on this. I mean, it was an amazing response. Now we have over 1,000 companies that have written apps on this ecosystem. So that's one way we share access so that startup companies can innovate on Volvo, and then they can approach us after they have done the integration there. So actually,
that is very really much connects to what Benny talked about before, about building a platform for innovation, driving innovation. With that said, before opening up for more questions, I want to hand over to Toronto and Caleb.
Thank you very much. Really fun presentation so far. Really enjoying it. So my name is Caleb Chapman. I work with Business Sweden. For those of us in Canada, we also call ourselves the Swedish Trade and Invest Council. So we are the organization that helps Swedish companies capture international revenue across the globe. And we also help domestic companies internationally find investment opportunities in Sweden. We work across a large amount of different segments and industry clusters. And our office in Toronto, we cover all of Canada. So for the Canadian market, we are actively chatting with companies all over Canada about potentially looking at Sweden for investment. And then we also help Swedish companies find different revenue streams through the Canadian market. When we take a look at the Swedish industry, the Swedish automotive industry, what might make it interesting for Canadians? Here are a few statistics that I thought were just so eye-popping. And the reason that I think that the industry is particularly interesting for Canadians, when I speak to Canadians, is the size of the industry in comparison to the country. There's perhaps some Canadians out there that aren't aware of how big the Swedish automotive and transportation mobility industry is, and it's quite large. In terms of research and development, we see that 25% there, we see that figure of R&D investments in Sweden go towards the mobility and transportation segment. So that's quite a large amount of the R&D investments going into Sweden making its way towards mobility. So we see that it's quite large. And quite funny, I saw a statistic there on Katarina's slide that showed 61% of that is likely making its way to the Gothenburg region, which I'm going to speak about soon. But there's some very, very interesting numbers and investments heading into the country. And we see that this really aligns with research and development in general. When we look at a global comparison of R&D as a percentage of GDP, Sweden has historically really led the way and is still now in 2020, I believe this data is from, still doing very well comparatively. Actually double in terms of the Canadian R&D as a percentage of GDP, of course, but it makes the Swedish ecosystems in general very interesting for North American or Canadian companies. When we look at the Swedish industry a little bit more detailed, I really love this map on the side here. You can see the different segments of the mobility industry and where they're kind of located on the map. You'll obviously notice that there's a large cluster there to the south of Sweden. So for the Canadian folks on the line who may be not familiar, that's where we have a large amount of the industry located. And that's actually where like a large amount of the population is located as well there, south of Stockholm and then down, we can say. And a large segment there around the Gothenburg area, which is where our friends today are located. So really, really strong industrial clusters and different makeups of companies that go into making the transportation or mobility segment so strong in Sweden. Another really highlight that transportation, mobility companies, automotive companies take advantage of is actually the geography at the end of the day. So many companies use Sweden to have a central location towards Northern Europe, and even as a relatively good connective place towards the German market. So we can see that transportation could go from Germany to Sweden, for example, in under 24 hours. So you have a lot of international firms even making that kind of connective supply chains between Gothenburg and Hamburg. So the country is very well geographically positioned, which is a highlight for many firms. Finally, I thought this statistic is so fun, and it's very interesting for Canadians who are perhaps a little bit surprised, right? Because when we think of Sweden and Canada, sometimes folks think of, oh, it must be higher taxes everywhere. Not really the case in some regards. So you can see here, corporate tax rates are a bit lower in comparison to some of the other European nations that we have listed here. Surprising for many companies, but it just means that the ability to be able to conduct corporate or commercial affairs in Sweden is more competitive in some regards if we're looking at it from a taxation purpose. All of those kind of statistics, of course, they're very interesting, but I just want to say what we do here at Business Sweden, we really are here for our Canadian companies that are looking at perhaps investing internationally or want to find new partnerships and don't really know how to go about it. We have obviously MobilityXlab on the line today, which have a fantastic program that we would recommend wholeheartedly. But if you're not sure where to take those steps, or if you are interested in a certain segment or you have questions about the market, connect with me, because we are really here to support you in your evaluation of Sweden, or if you have questions about a certain segment, we want to get you that information. And the good part about our services for the Canadian companies is that kind of information gathering and that assistance is free. So Peter and myself stand really readily available to support all of the Canadian companies here on the line, on the call in your evaluation of Sweden. And over the course of future presentations, I'm hoping to deliver you even more information about why Sweden is so interesting and how to really grasp the different R&D and innovations that are going on in the market. Whew, a lot of slides, but that's it from me. So I'm going to click here. Perfect. Any questions, I suppose, would be a good question. Hands and microphones, no?
Thank you so much, Caleb. And I know that you are doing a lot in different sectors as well. Are there any particular sectors that are of certain interest between the collaboration between Canada and Sweden?
Yeah, there's probably, I mean, we constantly talk about 5 or 6 here in the Canadian environment. So perhaps not so surprisingly, healthcare is a big one, as well as mining, forestry, some of these larger industries that have been around for a while, where Canada and Sweden have so much in common. Now, Canada and Sweden have a lot in common beyond these industries, but these large industries that have been kicking around for so long, we find a lot of synergies. The digital technology space, which we're talking about today in mobility, is definitely one that we see a lot of up and coming potential with as well. Canada has a very large amount of companies working within these sectors. So we would really like to see Canadian companies taking more of an advantage of what's going on in Sweden and vice versa. the collaboration potential between both the countries is very high.
Great. And now we want to open up the floor for question, thoughts from the audience. You can either use the chat or you can just unmute yourself and speak out. But before and while waiting for a question here, Katarina, I do have a question for you from your experience at MobilityXlab. What is the same thing we talked about with Benny before, but what is key that you guys discovered in this early in the process? What do you want to see from the startups applying to your programs?
So what we want to see from the startups applying, I think what I've seen is very beneficial when startups reach out to us and wants to collaborate with the partners is that they think about a use case. Who do they want to work with and how can that look like? Not saying that it has to be perfect and it has to be the one, but I've seen that when our partners kind of look at that in our kind of reviews and pitch sessions, that gets their mind going and saying, yes, this is a possibility, and then they can tweak and twist from there. And I hope it came across in my presentation, but we're a great platform if you want to reach out to our 6 corporate founders, because you get them all in one shot at MobilityXlab.
Great. Steve, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. So very nice feedback, Katarina. So at Acerta, we have, for example, a very clear use case that we would like to propose to Volvo and Veoneers, for example, but we don't fit really well in the 5 or 6 categories. We at Acerta, we work only with tier 1 automotive suppliers and car makers, but we work mainly on industry 4.0 applications. So how do you, are you open to side categories like that?
Yes, we are. I think there's an other option. If not, let me know in the form. And it's because we want to make sure that our partners have resources, and that's why we have our focus areas as we do. But of course, we work with innovation. We don't want to miss it. So you're more than welcome to send in an application, and we'll just put it in kind of the other box as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
no worries. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, Stephen, and great comment. Of course, it's recommended areas of interest, but there's a lot of things we need within our corporate sector, and just by highlighting that with just a couple of more minutes, if there's no other questions now, I just want to conclude the event that, for example, Caleb and myself, we are here to represent a lot of different corporations. So if you have an interest in the Swedish industry, working towards the Swedish industry and helping them innovate, feel free to reach out. But I want to highlight and stress really how amazing the MobilityXlab program is, or how they can really accelerate collaboration with the partners. There's been a lot of talk about platforms here today. Mikael talked about the platform in the car opening up Volvo for other companies. Benny is talking about how they will enable the car to be a platform also to drive innovation and to enable autonomous vehicles. MobilityXlab is really a platform for collaboration, and we can also be that platform and really help you leap towards Sweden. So before concluding, this is a talent attraction or scale up and startup attraction series we do have. We will have monthly events opening up our corporates and our potential partners to Canadian scale ups or international scale ups overall. So this month we have Focus Mobility. Same thing goes next month. We will host the same type of event together with MobilityXlab, but with 2 other partners. And then in April and May, we'll have more focus on life science and smart manufacturing, regarding what you said earlier here, Steve. So the next event we have is on the same date, but next month, 16th of March, same time, 9:30 Eastern Standard Time or 3:30 p.m. Central European Time. If you have any thoughts, any ideas or ideas of who you want to collaborate, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll send out some more information about the MobilityXlab, how to come in contact with them, about their program, and then I hope to see you again here in a month. Katarina, Michael, Benny, and Caleb, thank you so much for today. The presentation is now, all of the presentations are recorded, so for the people who joined us a bit later, they will be available afterwards as well. And I hope you have a lovely Thursday. If you have any questions, reach out to us. Otherwise, I'm looking forward for your reading your applications in the MobilityXlab program. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.